A folded piece of paper. That's what my son handed me on the evening of my 63rd birthday, a piece of paper folded in half, with a gas station logo printed on the front. Inside was a $25 gift card. I remember staring at it while my son's father-in-law sat across the table wearing the brand new Patagonia jacket my son had just given him, laughing loudly at something on his phone. I said thank you. I folded the paper back the way it came, and I did not say another word for the rest of the evening. My name is Robert. I spent 38 years working for the city of Toronto. 38 years as a transit operator, waking up at 4 a.m. in February when the temperature dropped to -20, scraping ice off my windshield before driving to the depot, putting on that uniform and doing my route without complaint. When I retired 4 years ago, my supervisor said I had one of the cleanest records in the entire division. Not one serious incident in nearly 4 decades. My wife, Catherine, passed away 11 years ago from ovarian cancer. We had been married for 26 years. When she was diagnosed, we had savings. Not a lot, we were never wealthy people, but we had savings, an RRSP, and about $40,000 in equity in our house in Scarborough. By the time she passed, most of that was gone. The treatments, the travel to and from Princess Margaret Hospital, the medications that weren't fully covered by OHIP, the modifications we had to make to the house so she could move around safely. I don't regret a single dollar. But the money was gone. After Catherine died, I kept working. I had to. My son, Daniel, was 22 at the time. Finishing a business degree at Ryerson, I continued to pay the portion of his tuition that his OSAP didn't cover. I helped with his rent when he moved into an apartment near campus. When he graduated and started working at a financial firm downtown, I was genuinely proud. He had done well. We had both survived something terrible together, and he had come out the other side standing. For about 3 years after his graduation, things were good between us. He would come for dinner on Sundays. We watched the Leafs games together when he was around. He called me regularly. Then he met Melissa. I want to be clear. I do not dislike Melissa. She is not a bad person. But when Daniel met her, something shifted in him. She came from a different kind of family. Her father, Gerald, ran a real estate business in Oakville. They owned a house on a ravine lot that I later found out was worth close to $2 million. Her mother had been a dental surgeon before retiring early. They took vacations in Portugal and Costa Rica. They drove European cars. They were not people who ever had to think very hard about money. Daniel had grown up in Scarborough in a 3-bedroom semi-detached, with a father who drove a city bus. I don't say that with any shame. I say it because I think when Daniel started spending time with Melissa's family, he became aware of the gap. And instead of being proud of where he came from, he seemed to want to close the distance as fast as possible. Within a year of meeting Melissa, Daniel had stopped coming for Sunday dinners. The phone calls became shorter. When I reached out, the conversations were polite, but rushed. He was always busy, always about to go somewhere. I told myself it was just the new relationship, that it would settle. Then they got engaged. I was happy. Of course I was happy. He called me to tell me, and I could hear the excitement in his voice, and whatever complicated feelings I had been carrying quietly went away in that moment. My son was in love and building a life. That was what mattered. The wedding planning started, and I was included at first. We had a few conversations about budget. Daniel told me they were looking at venues in the Niagara region. The numbers they were discussing were significant, somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000 for the full event. He mentioned casually that Gerald and his wife would be contributing substantially and asked if I could help as well. I told him honestly what I could do. I had about $22,000 in accessible savings at that point. The rest of my money was still locked in RRSPs that I hadn't started drawing from yet. I told him I could contribute $18,000 toward the wedding without putting myself in a difficult position. He thanked me, said it was appreciated. I transferred the money to his account within the week. I was not invited to any more of the planning conversations after that. The wedding was beautiful. I will say that. The venue was a restored property near Niagara-on-the-Lake. The food was excellent. Melissa looked lovely and Daniel looked happy. Gerald gave a toast that was funny and warm and lasted about 8 minutes. I gave a toast that I had written and rewritten 4 times. It lasted about 4 minutes, and I could see Daniel checking his watch near the end. After the wedding, the distance grew again. I understood they were newlyweds. They were building their life together. They had their own rhythms. I didn't push. I would send a text every week or two, and sometimes he responded quickly, and sometimes it was days. I'd read somewhere that this was common, that adult children pull away and then come back. I was patient. What I was not prepared for was how present Gerald seemed to be in their life, and how absent I apparently was becoming. I heard about it indirectly at first. A mutual family friend mentioned seeing Daniel and Melissa having dinner with Gerald and his wife at a restaurant in Yorkville. Another time, Daniel mentioned in passing that Gerald had helped them look at houses in Burlington. I knew Daniel and Melissa were planning to buy, and I had assumed at some point he might want my input as well, not financial. I had already given what I could, but just the kind of conversation a father and son have about such things. That conversation never came. They bought a house in Burlington in early 2023. A detached 4-bedroom on a quiet street, worth about $1.1 million. Daniel mentioned it to me after the fact. A brief call to let me know they'd closed on something. I congratulated him, asked if I could come see it sometime. He said of course. He'd let me know when they were settled. 6 months later, I still hadn't been invited. I want to pause here and tell you something about myself, because I think it matters for understanding the rest of this story. I am not a man who asks for much. I never have been. I grew up in Hamilton, the son of a steelworker and a school secretary. My parents were good people who didn't have much, and made it work with dignity. I carried that into my adult life. I don't need expensive things. I don't need praise. I just need to know that the people I love know that I love them, and that the years I spent sacrificing are at least acknowledged, even quietly. I had been keeping a document on my computer for a few years by this point. Not out of resentment, I want to be honest about that. I had started keeping it during the wedding planning conversations, partly because I am organized by nature, and partly because something told me I should have a clear record of what I had contributed financially over the years. I am not sure I could have told you exactly why at the time, but I kept it. When I went through it the night after the wedding, sitting alone in my house in Scarborough, I added everything up. Catherine's illness had cost us close to $47,000 out of pocket over 3 years, most of which had come from the savings we had both built together. That was a joint sacrifice, and I counted it differently. What I focused on was what I had given specifically to Daniel. His university tuition shortfall over 4 years, $19,400. Monthly rent contributions during his last 2 years of school, $9,600. The $18,000 for the wedding, a $4,200 loan I gave him in 2019 when his car needed emergency repairs and he was between paychecks. He had said he would pay me back. A $3,500 contribution I made quietly toward the deposit on his first apartment after graduation because he was short. Various amounts over the years for birthdays, Christmas, emergencies I estimated conservatively at around $6,000. The total was $60,700. I sat with that number for a while. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. My birthday is in September. Daniel texted me in the morning to say happy birthday, which I appreciated. He called that afternoon, briefly. While driving somewhere I could hear the road noise. He asked if I had any plans. I told him a few old friends from the depot were taking me to dinner. He said that sounded great. He said he and Melissa would love to take me out that weekend. That Saturday we met at a restaurant in Burlington near their neighborhood. It was a nice enough place. Not fancy, but comfortable. Melissa was warm and pleasant. We talked about their house, their plans, a trip they were thinking of taking to Scotland the following spring. At the end of the meal, Daniel slid something across the table to me. It was a birthday card with a gas station gift card inside. $25. The kind of thing you buy when you've forgotten it's someone's birthday, and you need something immediately. The envelope had not even been sealed, the flap was just tucked in. 2 weeks before this dinner, I had seen on Melissa's social media She had left her account public a series of photos from a surprise birthday party for Gerald. It had been held at a private event room at a steakhouse in Oakville. There was a custom cake. There were flowers. Daniel was in several photos, laughing with Gerald's friends, arm around Gerald's shoulder. In the caption, Melissa had written about what a wonderful father Gerald was and how lucky they were to have him in their lives. Gerald's birthday, I later confirmed, was the same week as mine. I drove home from Burlington that night, and I sat in my car in the driveway for about 15 minutes before going inside. The next morning, I called my old colleague Bill. Bill had retired a few years before me and had gone through something similar with his own family. A situation where he'd felt pushed to the margins after his son remarried. He wasn't a therapist or a lawyer. He was just someone I trusted. Someone who had been through something and come out with his perspective intact. I told him everything. The wedding money. The loan that was never repaid. The house purchase I wasn't told about until after the fact. The birthday dinner. The gift card. The photos from Gerald's party. Bill listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Rob, what do you actually want to happen here?" I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "I want to stop being taken for granted," I said. "And I think I need to stop making it so easy." A few weeks after that conversation with Bill, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Susan. I had been referred to her by a friend who had used her for estate planning. Her office was on Yonge Street, modest and professional, and she had the manner of someone who had heard many versions of this kind of story and didn't need you to convince her of anything. I told her I wanted to review my will and my beneficiary designations. I told her what I had. The house in Scarborough paid off, appraised at around $820,000. My pension, which I was drawing from, my RRSP, now converted to a RIF, worth approximately $134,000. Some GIC savings, about $41,000. A small whole life insurance policy with a death benefit of $50,000. Daniel was the sole beneficiary of everything. That had been set up years ago, after Catherine died, and I had never revisited it. Susan asked me what I wanted to change and why. I told her. She didn't flinch. She explained the options clearly. In Ontario, there is no forced heirship for adult children who are not financially dependent on the deceased, unlike some other jurisdictions. I could legally leave my estate to whomever I chose, provided Daniel could not demonstrate he was dependent on me for his basic needs, which he clearly was not. I told her I wasn't sure I wanted to disinherit him entirely. I told her I wanted to think carefully. She suggested I take a few weeks, which I did. During those weeks, I did something else. I wrote Daniel a letter. Not an angry letter. I was deliberate about that. I wrote it the way I had learned to communicate during a conflict resolution course the transit union had put us through years ago. I described specific things I had observed and experienced. I described how they had made me feel. I told him about the $60,700. I told him about the birthday party photos. I told him about the gift card. I told him I loved him and that I was not interested in punishing him, but that I needed him to understand what the last several years had looked like from where I was standing. I mailed it. I did not email it or text it. I printed it, signed it, and mailed it to his address in Burlington, because I wanted it to be something real that he had to hold. He called me 11 days later. The call did not go well. He was defensive from the first sentence. He told me the letter felt like an attack. He said I was being unfair to Melissa. He said the birthday dinner was just a dinner, and he didn't think I cared about that kind of thing. When I mentioned the $60,700, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dad, I didn't ask you to do any of that." I said, "No, you didn't. That's actually the point." He said he needed some time to think. I said that was fine. I told him I loved him. He said he knew. We hung up. He did not call back. I waited 4 weeks. Then I called Susan and told her I was ready to proceed. We restructured everything. The house I placed into a trust with specific terms it could not be liquidated by any beneficiary until 5 years after my death, and the proceeds were to be divided equally between Daniel and 2 charitable organizations I had been supporting quietly for years. One that funds transit bursaries for young people in lower-income families pursuing skilled trades, and one that supports cancer patients' families with non-medical expenses. The RRIF I redirected entirely to those 2 charities. The GIC savings I divided between a niece I am close to and a former colleague who had been like a brother to me for 30 years. The life insurance I redirected to my niece as well. Daniel would inherit approximately 1/3 of the house value. Not nothing, but not what he had been expecting. I am not going to pretend this was easy. There were nights when I questioned myself. There were mornings when I thought about calling him and trying again. I thought about Catherine, about what she would say. I think she would have been heartbroken. I think she also would have understood that there is a limit to what a person can absorb quietly before something changes inside them. Christmas came. I spent it with my niece's family in Hamilton, her husband, her 3 kids, my brother-in-law who had driven up from Brantford. It was loud and warm and full of food. At one point, her youngest daughter, who is 7, climbed onto the armchair beside me and fell asleep against my shoulder while the hockey game played in the background. I sat very still, so I wouldn't wake her. Daniel sent me a text on Christmas morning. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Hope you're having a good day." I replied with the same. Nothing more was said. In January, I received a call from Daniel. His tone was different this time. Quieter, less certain. He said he had been thinking about the letter. He said some of what I'd written had stayed with him. He asked if we could meet. We met at a Tim Hortons near my house, which felt appropriately Canadian and sufficiently neutral. He came alone. He looked tired. We sat across from each other with our coffees, and he told me that he had talked to Melissa, and that she had actually been the one to push him to make the call. He said she had read the letter, he had shown it to her, and she had told him that she understood why I had written it. I appreciated that more than I told him. He apologized for the birthday dinner. He said he hadn't thought about how it looked, and that wasn't an excuse. He acknowledged the money, which I could tell cost him something. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He just said he was sorry, and that he wanted things to be different. I told him that I appreciated what he was saying. I told him I wasn't interested in keeping score or relitigating everything. I told him that what I needed going forward was simply to be treated as someone whose presence in his life had value, not as a resource, not as an afterthought, but as his father. He nodded. He looked at the table. Then he looked up and said, "I know, Dad. I know. I have not told him about the changes to my will. I see no reason to. The point was never to threaten him or bargain with him. The point was to make a decision that reflected reality as I understood it. A decision that protected the things I had worked for, honored the people who had actually been present in my life, and stopped operating from the assumption that love, to be real, must be unconditional to the point of being invisible. We have had dinner 3 times since that meeting at Tim Hortons. He came to my house in February, and we watched the Leafs game together, the way we used to. Melissa came once in March. She brought a bottle of wine and helped me figure out why my dishwasher wasn't draining properly. We laughed about it. It felt, cautiously, like the beginning of something. I am 63 years old. I have a pension, a paid-off house, and more good years ahead of me than I sometimes remember to count. I drove a city bus through Toronto winters for 38 years, and I did it without complaint, and I am proud of that. I cared for my wife through the hardest 3 years of both our lives. I raised a son alone after she was gone. I gave what I had, and I gave it gladly, and I would do most of it again. But I am also a man who finally learned, later than I should have, that quiet dignity is not the same as quiet disappearance. That being easy to take for granted is not the same as being generous. And that sometimes the most honest thing you can do for yourself, for your son, for the memory of everyone who loved you when you had nothing to offer but yourself, is to stop pretending you don't notice. There is still a $25 gas station gift card sitting in the drawer of my desk at home. I haven't used it. I haven't thrown it away either. Some mornings I look at it and feel the old hurt. Other mornings I look at it and feel something closer to gratitude because it was the thing that finally made me stop waiting for someone else to decide what I was worth.